Hey guys, first regards in here. I'll be talking about the upcoming class for Space Marine 2 in year 3 and what this class might actually be. And to talk about this with me, I have brought on Jefficus once again. Now, Jeff, we have talked about a new class coming to Space Marine 2 many times before. We mentioned things like Justiciar or Apothecary. So, how do you feel about the confirmation of a new class coming next year and just like what this could mean for the game? What do you think it will be in the future?
Well, as we've discussed, new classes are a really good way to breathe fresh life into the game. Space Marine 2 does such a good job of differentiating its playstyles and creating replayability with its various classes. And with something like the Prestige grind, like you're kind of guaranteed to stick to that class for, like 100 hours or something like that before you really master it. And I think that it's fantastic. I think that this isn't going to be the last class that we see for Space Marine 2. And I think that Space Marine 2 is going to get continued support in the future. We're probably going to get at least two or three more because there are a couple of different specialist archetypes that could be added, and that would facilitate very well into Space Marine 2's gameplay.
Believe that they said initially before the Tech Marine came out that they were going to wait until they saw how Tech Marine performed to add in a new class to the game or confirm a new class. And I imagine Tech Marine did very well for Saber Interactive because, first of all, they pushed the Tech Marine out with like the game on Xbox Game Pass and PSN Plus for the first time ever. So they want as many new players to come into the game as possible for the Tech Marine. And we've talked about this a little bit before, that AdMech has been heavily pushed by Games Workshop this year. We have Skatari coming up in Darktide. We had Adeptus Mechanicus too. So I think like next year, we might get some hints towards that based on like what the lineup of games will be. And personally, what I think the next class will be is probably a Chaplain. I know some people mentioned Apothecary before, but I really think they're going to move towards a Chaplain because a proper melee support class in the game, I think that would fit the current lineup of class archetypes far more, though we should keep in mind that their other game, World War Z, did have a medic come out, so that is a possibility for the Apothecary as well. But like, which class do you think it's going to be?
Well, I'm kind of torn between three different options, and it all kind of falls in line with different pieces of evidence and teasers that Saber and Focus have put out on their various social media channels. Like, for example, with Chaplin, I don't know if you remember their Facebook post where they did it as like an April Fool's joke. They're
Oh
like, "Hey,
yeah, yeah, I
introducing the
did see that.
Chaplain," like, "Oh, hey, we're gonna be adding to this game," and it was obviously like April 1st, like, "Ah, I fooled you." And but they've kind of pseudo confirmed that they are working on a great sword, not doing any lightning claws. Sorry, lightning claws fans. And so that kind of makes me lean towards something like the Judiciar because I think that we need a controlling playstyle in the game. I think we need something to control enemies. That's not something we currently see, especially with our melee lineup of Assault, Bulwark, and Vanguard. If you consider the Vanguard kind of a pseudo melee, Apothecary would work very well with Space Marine 2's combat system, especially if you consider the Biologist, which is more of like a debuffer type character. And then the last one would, of course, be Chaplain, which falls in line with what I think Games Workshop is trying to push for 11th edition. The trailer that featured the Blood Angels, for example, the narrator and a main character of that trailer was a Chaplain. So it would make sense if that was kind of the direction that Space Marine 2 was going to be heading towards next year.
I definitely agree that Chaplin is highly likely. I mean, just based off of the previous comments of the creative director at Saber Interactive, they did say they want to like mess around with Chaplin at some point in the future, and picking the class for them was pretty difficult, but they went with the Tech Marine first. Obviously, I think that the choice for Tech Marine was not just Saber, it was also Games Workshop, obviously, saying like, hey, we're pushing AdMech this year. The first class you guys will release for your game will be a Tech Marine. You do what you want after that, or like, we're going to push you to do Chaplin in the future. As far as just this year is concerned, that's an easy option for them because number one, just this year's have like sworn silence, so they have no voice lines, so they can just like completely skip over hiring voice actors and stuff like that. But also the Temper Mortis, for those of you who are unaware, is like a time slowing device these just this year's carry around with them. That could be really cool for like slowing down enemy range fire, slowing down enemy melee units. I think support archetypes like that are very fun for players, but also we could see that with an Apothecary because Apothecary is something players have been asking for forever because let's be real, a very like common common want for players in horde shooters is a healing archetype class because players want their games to go more easily, and because of that, apothecary has been a much mentioned thing throughout the game's entire life cycle. And like I said before, World War Z did have a meta class come out like post launch for it, and that was a very popular class in that game. And Saber Interactive has said before they want like World War Z to be a huge inspiration for their post launch additions to this one. So apothecary and chaplain, like that's kind of where I lean on like the most likely options, because they did say that the class they'll be adding was like much requested by the community, and I haven't seen any that have been requested as much as the apothecary and chaplain. And also the 11th edition trailer, like you mentioned before, that does have a chaplain like right in front of us, so I think that would fit the game pretty well. I think both of those have a fairly support archetype, because a chaplain could be a melee buffer and a biologist could be a debuffer for the enemies and and like a buffer for your teammates. So that's where I lean on that one.
Yeah, I think that I think Apothecary would be a great fit, and it would also be an opportunity for Saber to finally nerf the Bulwark, because a lot of people kind of hang on to Bulwark because of its ability to just deliver a full team heal pretty much whenever the Bulwark wants. They kind of have like direct control over that cooldown because of certain prestige perk setups. And so adding an Apothecary with not as much healing as the Bulwark might make it seem like it's more of like a, hey, you can bring this. It's not a mandatory requirement to bring kind of this support into your game. Like, it's nice to have, but you're definitely giving up, damage or resource economy, because maybe the apothecary can't regenerate any ammunition or equipment, and all it does is HP. Definitely a good opportunity for that. But man, it would be so freaking funny, in my opinion, to add a chaplain, because you would either have to have the second company pull into reserve companies to pull from their chaplains, so basically they would have to borrow one, or you would have to play as freaking Leandros, which would be, in my opinion, amazing.
I think players would love that.
I don't think Leandros did anything wrong. I am team Leandros all day, every day.
No, Leandros is a great chaplain.
He is. Titus is sus as fuck. So I think that playing as Leandros would be fantastic. I would love to get into the headspace of that guy. So I would love it. I'd be all for it.
As far as your point on nerfing the Bulwark's HP healing, I feel like that would go over pretty, with a pretty big controversy if they did remove healing off Bulwark and probably Vanguard. Now, Saber Interactive has said before they're not a big fan of like the healing class abilities in this game, at least for like global heals. So right now we have two major ones with Invigorating Icon on the Bulwark for like your banner heal, and the Unmatched Heal on the Vanguard for like healing off every extremis. I think those might get like nerfed or removed if we did get a healing apothecary archetype, because they'd probably want to keep most healing on the apothecary. But then you run into the issue where like players would be like, oh, or especially casual players would be like, oh, we must have an apothecary on our team. That can lead to some pretty toxic interactions where, like, let's say you load up into a quick match and suddenly you have players be like, take apothecary or we kick you and stuff like that. So they might just leave the healing as is on Bulwark and Vanguard. And personally, I think having these healing class archetypes, like these healing class perks, is good for the game. I think there should be classes and just like team comps that are easier to use for newer players, because at the end of the day, it is a PvE game, and like while challenge does matter, while like you can't have things be completely unbalanced, I see this come up a lot where people are like, oh, it's a PvE game, why does balance matter? It's because, at some point you want to actually interact with the game systems, and if every gun one shots, if every ability gives you back all of your HP, you're just playing, the game's playing itself basically. So you want to have like a little bit of a middle ground there, but having some type of like higher margin for error class tree or something like that, I think that's good for the game. I don't really think they should remove the Bulwark or Vanguard perks, but that might be a decision they make on the apothecary if they add that. Though I will say one other thing I've seen requested by the community a lot is like a Terminator or Librarian class. Number one, Terminators are like never coming to Space Marine 2, in my opinion.
No.
Terminators are just way too different. They almost always operate as like a primary Terminator unit versus like, an addition to a Primaris unit. A Librarian, I think that would be perfect for the game, but I really think they're going to save that one for like Space Marine 3, because imagine you have Space Marine 3 coming out and the trailer shows like the upcoming class will be, Librarian, and people will go nuts and be like, holy shit, I cannot wait to play Librarian in Space Marine 3's operation. So I think they will probably save that for Space Marine 3. So the big choices here are like Chaplain or Apothecary. And on the note of Chaplain, how would you want that class to play if it did come to the game?
Well, for the chaplain, I think that it would be interesting, right? Because they should theoretically only have one melee weapon as an option. So I would want them to have both a primary and a secondary weapon as well. And then I would want them to do something that they've never done before for any other class. I think that if they add a chaplain to the game, you should be able to kind of switch your loadout a little bit. Like if you want to run an assault chaplain, you could do that. So you can have a jetpack, or if you want to equip and the aux scanner from tactical, you could do that. Like kind of like a choose your own ability or playstyle kind of class. And I think they could totally do that because we're seeing this with something like Darktide, where they're kind of evolving the way that they do classes. The Skitarii, a lot of information is going to be releasing on it very soon, but you're able to build your talent tree in several different directions. It's not linear like the other classes in the game. And so I think that the more classes that these co-op horde games for the 40k setting put out, the more they're learning to think outside the box and outside of the conventional perk trees and everything that we have available to us. So I would ideally like to see multiple playstyles accessible through the chaplain, with the one thing holding the chaplain together being their melee weapon.
I'm glad you actually brought this up, because this is something I have echoed before, where Tech Marine, he feels like a post-launch class. Like the class feels substantially more.
Yes.
He feels like
Yep.
substantially better in his perk tree than the other classes
And
from the base
evolution.
game do. Yeah, in evolution, like all of his playstyles are very distinct. His servo gun has like 3 very distinct options for like plasma, sniper, and standard. And every time I like talk about the Tech Marine, it takes me like an extra 8 minutes or so, because there's just more going on with the class. So I think we should really expect something like that from like a chaplain or apothecary or like any future class for the game, because you have to keep in mind that the team working on Space Marine 2 now is not the team that was working on Space Marine 2 when it came out. So the initial 6 classes of Space Marine 2 were made by a different, part of the development team at Saber, obviously, but like a different team than what we are currently working with. And the balance of Space Marine 2 as it stands in year 2 is significantly better on like every class than it was in the game's launch. And that is almost entirely the responsibility, the result of this current team we're working with. And I think they're going to do the same thing with a chaplain or an apothecary, whatever new class we have, because I really would expect every single post-launch class to get like a little more intricate. I think they'll be very good for the game, because Tech Marine is, in my opinion, like the best class in the game in terms of depth right now, besides like some of the additional features on Assault or Bulwark. And because of that, I think we should expect something similar to those.
Well, so not just with the chaplain or whatever class is going to be coming to Space Marine 2 next, but also with like Vanguard and Heavy. Like whenever they do reworks for those classes, Saber has learned a lot since launch, and the Space Marine 2 sandbox itself has evolved since launch. Initially we were running just 6 operations on ruthless difficulty, and now you have things like hard stratagems where you can get double terminus spawns with more health and more damage, that will consistently hit the rotation. And so your classes need to be good enough to take on that kind of challenge, whether it's in a group or solo. And so this is now what Saber is using to balance their classes. They're not using ruthless difficulty anymore. They're looking at absolute, they're looking at stratagems, and they're also looking at siege. So I'm very excited for any potential class buffs or reworks that are going to be hitting our current lineup, and then of course for the classes that are going to be added in 2027 and beyond.
I think that's a good point. And one other thing I want to mention here is that on like the sandbox, Saber did come out and say like directly in a community post of like, okay, the sandbox, expanding the sandbox is their #1 priority. So when it comes to like class power levels, I think every class, like some level of power creep will always happen in a game like this as new content is added. But I think Space Marine 2 right now, in a lot of ways, can be much harder than it was at launch for like different reasons. But the reasons the game is hard now is like the game is far more fun and far more balanced and fair. But like the difficult things it throws at you, those are tools you can use you can use tools from your classes to deal with those in like much more interesting ways than launch. And like you said, ruthless difficulty is no longer the main difficulty we're balancing around. We're balancing around siege mode, hard strats, and absolute difficulty, and all of those have a pretty big emphasis on bosses. And I also imagine that like as time goes on, they've mentioned here with things like the tactical class, they're going to be expanding like melee mechanics as well and stuff like that in the future. So maybe we'll see something like that with a chaplain. But that's pretty much all I have to say on my thoughts for a new class. I really do think we're stuck between Chaplain and Apothecary. I don't really expect it just this year. I think that's like a little too out there for this game. Not to say like it's like totally out there, but I feel like with the current lineup of Primaris, we have a Chaplain just like fits in perfectly, or an Apothecary, and I think like Librarian is also just like, a little too excessive for what they want to do in the game currently. Maybe they'll put that in before Space Marine 3, but definitely not in year 3 in my opinion.
I just love that there are options, dude. I just love that we have this speculation in the first place. I think that it says a lot about 40K and about the fandom in general that we are all just extremely excited about the possibilities of more classes getting added to the game.
Oh,
I love it. I
definitely.
think it's great.
I think new classes are going to keep coming to the game until Space Marine 3 comes out. I also think they're aware that new classes is what brings players to the game. Like, these will almost always be the biggest updates for a game like this in any Horde shooter. You see the same thing in Dark Tide. You see the same thing in World War Z. You see the same stuff with, like, new factions as well. But, like, for the most part, classes just add so much on their own. Like, even if you have a fairly unsubstantial update, like we had with patch 12 in terms of, like, new content beyond the class, because we just got, like, one operation and 3 new heroic weapons. And in fact, patch 12 was initially supposed to launch with no new heroic weapons. Add those, they like split them between patch 13 and patch 12 to like make up for that. But Tech Marine was still enough to bring a ton of players back, and I think we'll see the same thing with like Chaplain and also the upcoming anniversary patch. So thank you for talking about this with me, Jeff. You guys in the comments can let me know what you think the new class will be. I think there's like a lot of interesting speculation, but for the most part, I think people are landing on the Apothecary, Chaplain, or just this year. But in my opinion, it's Apothecary or Chaplain. But thank you guys for watching. Jeff, if you have any final thoughts, let me know.
No, I think we covered this pretty neatly.
All right, guys, if you want to subscribe to Jeff, you can find his channel in the description below. If you want to subscribe to me, you can find me here, obviously. And as always, thank you for watching. Take it easy. Bye.